Collins from Stellar Labs, and I have some fascinating speakers here. We have Nina Bressler-Murphy, who works for Novartis, and she is the learning, she's going to have to say it for me.
Enterprise capability. So I sit on the learning leadership team and also on our talent leadership team.
Okay, so Nina's going to tell us a fascinating story. And then Julian Stodd here, who I'm sure many of you know, is with Sea Salt Learning. And I think of you as a curious researcher. So they're going to share their stories about curiosity. Now, I have to apologize because Amy Brann was supposed to be here. And Amy, unfortunately, is ill and can't make it today. So Amy has shared some resources with us, which we'll make available to you. And Julian has very kindly stepped in place of Amy just to help support the session. So we want you to get the most out of this session. We want you to, by the end of it, to have answered your curious question. And we want you to enjoy yourselves. Is everybody ready to start? Okay. Over
Great.
to you.
Thank you so much. So can I just get a show of hands? Who's had a curious day and a half so far? Great. Well, curiosity is something that I've been delving deep into over the past few years and looking at how we can create curious communities in our organization. And it's just one of our cultural aspirations. I'll dive into that. And then Julian, who has done such a lovely job of coordinating his shoes to the Novartis brand colors, will talk to us a little bit about why curiosity is so important for a culture of learning. And then I would like us all together in our groups to do an exercise where we plan some curiosity interventions that you can then take back to your work. So it'll be a little bit of a brainstorm activity, and we have some materials for that. And so let's get started. I have been at Novartis for about 3 years, and the thing about Novartis that makes it really easy to commit myself to the work is the purpose. We have a purpose to reimagine medicine, and the ways in which that we deliver that purpose are really clear. There is the need to deliver transformative innovation, to go big on data and digital, to build trust with society, and to operate well. But behind all of that is the fact that we need to unleash the power of our people. And we believe that we can unleash the power of our people by talking to them and building in them 3 cultural aspirations to be inspired, curious, and unbossed. So unbossed is all about being accountable for what you do, how you lead. You are a piece of the puzzle. As an individual, it's about knowing that I contribute my mind, my heart, my hands to this work, and that I have autonomy to make the right decisions for my organization, and that I'm aligned to where the organization is going together around our strategic pillars. As a leader, unbossing is about removing roadblocks and about giving people the opportunity to bring their best selves to their work every day. Inspire is all about feeling that energy and wanting to not just bring your best self to your work, but really to role model our values every day in not just the work that we do in Novartis, but also out with society. And where I spend most of my time is around curiosity. And curiosity, for me, is all about building a culture where people are not know-it-alls, but they're learn-it-alls. They're open to failure. They believe that they should challenge each other's assumptions openly and question everything and have really constructive dialogue around the work that we do. So to help foster that, we put a program together called Going Big on Learning. And the imperative of Going Big on Learning is to create a culture of curiosity where everyone, everywhere, at any time, can get the best learning and development opportunities brought to them. And the road to this wasn't easy. Just a few years ago, we had 21 learning management systems, so we were just trying to solve where you even send people to do that. The learning organization was completely fragmented. We didn't even know who worked in learning. I remember going through sheets of data trying to figure out, does this person deliver learning in this organization? and we couldn't figure it out. There was no way to even collect the amount of learning that was happening. So we had to really start by solving these operational issues first. There was a big focus on compliance training, so this kind of value add of curiosity beyond what our regulators want us to do wasn't built in and ingrained into our everyday work. We knew that prioritizing learning was an imperative for us, because if we're not curious, if we can't build the right skills that we need to go big on data and digital, to reimagine medicine, and to continuously grow and have an adaptive mindset that helps us manage the complexity of not just our industry and our organization, but of the world that we live in. So, going big on learning for us had a large technology component to it. Last year, we had completed the migration of 21 learning management systems into Cornerstone, and we were able to start also bringing all of our vendors in and creating an ecosystem of content that we can curate to individual learning needs, that ties into upward feedback that you get from your teams, that then the right learning solution comes to you, that drives adoption, not just of content, but creates that flexibility to learn anywhere in the organization. So we said to ourselves, how do we create a transformative learning experience for all 108,000 employees across 140 countries? And just turning on all that functionality wasn't enough. It's not enough to just merge systems and bring in content. We needed to tackle the curation piece, and we still are. We're at the beginning of that journey and working hard to move it forward. We also introduced in the last year a lot of other learning opportunities that were outside of the learning experience platform, that were outside of our Cornerstone solution. We introduced Team Booster, for example, which is an intervention, or a whole set of interventions that teams can take in, bring into a meeting, bring into a workshop, and really curate that culture journey. And I'll talk to you about some of the other things that we did last year and that we introduced as part of our Curiosity chapter. The Cornerstone Platform that we have was the entryway to accessing a lot of this learning. So we have a learner homepage where that curation happens and people can access the events and activities that are available in the organization. So we turned a lot of things on, but we didn't have a story around it. It's, as I said, not enough to just turn things on. We need to create a real powerful culture around learning. So on July 1st, we put out a call for curious minds, and we kicked it all off with a message, which, sorry, the sound.
We lost the sound.
It's supposed to be really powerful. When you ready? It's coming out of the Acer. Should I try it again? We can watch it at the end. I'll just keep going, and then we'll take you back. But if you can work on the sound in the meantime, that would be great. Okay. Really nice video there where we talk about childhood wonder being the concept that we want to take through all of our work and that we want to bring into the office every day. And we launched with this video, we started this Curiosity chapter, and everyone came to a page that we called the Curiosity homepage, where we hosted not just this video, but all of the assets that we had created around curiosity. And on July 1st, we launched a schedule of webinars that lasted from July to the end of September. And we expected to have about 60 webinars during that time. But as we started asking people to bubble up content and talk to us about the great knowledge that's happening in the organization, we ended up with 133 webinars because knowledge just kept coming up and people wanted to participate. And at some point we had to say, sorry, no more. I just don't have resources to schedule any more webinars, and the participation was huge. We gave people a template for creating a physical zone for their curiosity in their offices. So we gave them something really boring. It was a yellow wall that said, "I am curious." And our network went crazy. They had this amazing wall in Brazil. I just love it. This is Shanghai here. And it was a place where people could meet and celebrate their curiosity together. So here is our CEO with some graduates in Prague at our curiosity wall there. So it became really a physical meeting point to build community. This could not have happened without volunteers from all over the world. At the beginning of the chapter, we asked for curiosity volunteers just on Yammer, our social networking site. Novartis has one of the highest usages of Yammer, actually. And a lot of people came forward, and they weren't learning people, they weren't HR people, they weren't comms people, they were business people who wanted to drive this in their teams. And they took a lot of the global assets that we created and then deployed them locally and built on them. So without them, none of this would have come to life. Our executive committee was such a strong voice in helping bring this to life. Vaz wrote about curiosity on LinkedIn. You can go and find his articles. He actually published a great article about leadership yesterday. Marie France, our head of pharma, shared her personal playlist, and it was so meaningful when our leaders started talking about how they learn, and not about business books, but Vaz shared the fact that he is a lover of history, that *Sapiens* by Yuval Harari is one of his favorite books and really frames the way that he thinks about the way that our business needs to run. It became personal. Right now, it's February, so people are doing development plans. This year, just now on Yammer, I have leaders like Vaz, the head of our business for drug development in India, sharing their development plans on Yammer. That's so powerful. So in terms of the webinars, we have such great knowledge in Novartis. It wasn't just about leadership or soft skills. People brought so much science to the table, information about how we can be better design thinkers, how we can apply that in patient settings, how we can build trust with society, what are the access programs that we're building, what is our strategy. So we ended up with 133 global webinars instead of 60, but what was really impressive is instead of 20 local events that we planned, our volunteer network created 253. So. And this is a little bit how it felt. And there's also there's supposed to be music here. So if you know the Muppet song, Maña Maña, imagine that it's playing. Maña Maña. So, but it was really a wild year. And we got great results from it. So building up that energy, first of all, from a business perspective, gave us one of our most successful years ever. Novartis had 6 approvals by the FDA last year. The closest comparison to that was 2 approvals in a year. So biggest year ever. And in terms of what we did coming out of the chapter, what I'm most proud of is that we touched 95 countries, that we had 100,000 learning hours, and that 34,000, so a third of our people, registered for these global webinars. The responses were really incredible. People said, why are we learning just 1 month a year? Learning month is great, curiosity chapter is great, but we want this stream of content all year round. So that's what we're working on now, is answering them and really thinking about how learning happens every day. It's the aspiration of our executive committee and of our leadership that we spend 5% of our time learning. So we need to give people that space to learn, and they're asking for it. We've heard it through some of the ideation events around culture that we've had, and we definitely heard it coming out of this curiosity chapter. So we're only getting started. This is really the beginning of our story. There's so much more that we're going to be bringing to life over the next few years, and I am just really excited to be working in an organization that is inspired, curious, and unbossed, and where we can live that curiosity culture every day. So that's a little bit about the Novartis story. I think we'll take some questions at the end, because I'm sure you have some practical questions. And you can also reach out to me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. And maybe we'll get to see the video. Amy was supposed to be here today, but she's not feeling well. And in terms of Amy's amazing work on the neuroscience of curiosity, I've put a link in the slides, which you'll get after the conference. And we encourage you to go to Amy's website and read through. So before I turn it over to Julian, who's going to talk to us about why this curious culture is so good for learning, I do want to share our video with you as soon as we get connected to it again. And okay, it's this slide. It's still coming out of the Acer.
Remember when you were a child? How you were curious about everything and everyone? How you had a sense of wonder about the world around you and asked questions, so many questions. How does this work? Where does that go? What does this button do? We're all born curious. But what happens as we age? Does this fascination simply fade away? Do we lose our longing for answers? What if we could recapture that same childlike sense of wonder? To explore, discover, and understand. Curiosity drives discovery. Curiosity solves problems. Curiosity powers innovation. We all need curiosity to learn, to grow, to fail, to improve, to achieve, to extend people's lives, to reimagine medicine.
And Julian, I'm just going to give this group a taste of my So over to you.
That's the end of that.
We are really stuck for sound today. So Julian's going to put the idea of curiosity into kind of a cultural and commercial context for us. I think that's about what you're planning to do, isn't it, Julian?
That's great. Have I broken my microphone, or is that working? Yeah, can you hear me at the back okay?
Over to Julian.
Because I've got to say, it looks like there's been some fatalities at the back. Is anybody still going? Is still there? Yes. I remember when I had that wonderful childlike sense of curiosity. I clearly remember it. I got bought a stapler, a red stapler. And my childhood sense of curiosity was like, I wonder what would happen if I put my finger in the stapler. So I learnt from that. I was asked to sort of bring in a perspective on curiosity, and I wanted to reflect on individual and organizational perspectives. So a little bit on sort of individual imperatives, so the neurology, psychology of curiosity, but actually quite substantially on the organizational frame around curiosity. So what are those things that actually enable or block curiosity? It's easy to see it as an individual trait, but there's a significant cultural impact around it as well. So that's what I want to explore. But I started off with this piece about the landscape of curiosity. And I'll just sort of tell you how I came by that. So we're sort of very lucky that we have a young son. So my son is 10 months old. And he's doing those things. Does anybody have children? I feel sure some of you do. So if you found the instruction manual, I'd be very grateful. He's becoming increasingly curious in all these strange and wonderful ways. So currently, he enjoys repeating stuff back to us. So if I say to him, he likes bears. So if I say bear, he will just sit there and say bear back to me, which is great. So of course, then I progress to say, well, papa, say papa. And he just looks at me. And I can see that he's thinking, what is he doing? He sort of just stares. He can't make the noise yet, but he just stares at me intently. There's clearly something sort of going on in his head. He's trying to figure it out. And I guess cognitively, what he's doing is it's creating a space of disturbance. I'm doing something he doesn't yet understand. So he's trying to put a frame around what that thing is. And then ultimately, he'll move into rehearsal and prototyping. So he makes other noises back at me, but they're clearly not right. But he will continue to do that until he sort of figures out how to do it properly. So curiosity in and of itself is only part of the thing we're trying to achieve. We're probably looking at curiosity as an act of disturbance, individually and organizationally, moving into the learning of new things, be it skills, behaviors, ways of being. But it's not enough to learn something. We then have to move into rehearsing and prototyping it. And we then move into performance. It's quite easy to focus on the very start and the very end of that journey. Let's be curious. Let's achieve incredible outcomes. But it's a journey with quite a few stages, and at each stage, we can be silenced or blocked. I drew this after I spoke to my nephew, who's a little bit older. He's 13 years old and extremely annoying because he lives in fear of me doing science on him. He used to love it when he was younger when we built steam engines, but now he sort of, this look crosses his face. And I said to him around Christmas that I was thinking about curiosity, and he asked me this very annoying question: what is curiosity? So I said, obviously I started answering confidently, and then I realized I had no idea how to answer. So I said, it's like you're stood in the middle of a landscape and you're on a hill, and you look out and you can see mountains and trees and forests and rivers, and everything that you can see isn't curiosity. You kind of know what that is. You may be exploring it still, but it's not necessarily curiosity. It's what lies beyond that. So it's what's behind the hill or beyond the forest. That's your sort of space of curiosity. And that conversation got me thinking about it. You know, when and how do we find the opportunity to explore our own curiosity? Some of it may be that we're given a space and an opportunity to do it. But to be effective, we probably have to be within a community of explorers who will hold us safely as we make that journey. And we also have to understand very clearly the kind of consequence that might be shone upon us if we are curious about the wrong thing. You know, stapling your finger is a lesson that should be shared. So then I chose, this is another slide to think about stories, and specifically the violence of stories, which is something I'm quite interested in. Stories are the ways that culture is held. Indeed, cognitively, it's the way that we are held individually. Our consciousness is held in a series of stories that we tell about ourselves, and that we tell about others, and that others tell about us. So curiosity is perhaps also a way of rewriting your story, but it doesn't happen in isolation. Very often stories are used within organizations as a way of constraining or controlling us. I was talking last night to a friend who works in an organization that's represented downstairs, and they said, we're just talking about gender pay gap. And she said, of course I'm paid less as a woman, just like matter of fact, and then carried on talking about something. And I said, well, just sort of stop and just ask yourself that. Why did you not dwell on that fact? Why was it not, I'm paid less as a woman? It was just like a background to the story that she told. And of course, one of the reasons is because if you're the first person to stand up and say something, you're the person that may get assassinated. If somebody else stands up first, then you can be the hero that will follow them. But often curiosity is silenced because the dominant narrative is one which continues to do the things it has always done. So again, understanding curiosity is not just about the individual imperative. It's about the ways dominant narratives and cultures of organizations can silence us. But of course, much of it is about the ways that we will silence ourselves to avoid experiencing that kind of consequence. I use normally this model to explore consequence because it looks at two aspects. There's a sort of a circle, a sphere of consequence. So the outside is a hard edge. There are always rules. Rules and laws provide a hard edge of consequence. And they're generally pretty well understood, and we become expert at avoiding clashing against them. But in some work I've been doing around trust, so the landscape of trust research is a very large-scale global research project, so cross-cultural, over 30 different organizations looking at trust. When we ask people, what are the factors that limit your individual space of operation, they say only about 30% of limitation is held in formal rules and sanctions. About 70% is held in social judgment and social norms. So I could sort of generalize that to say that individually we are more limited by the actions of those around us and the ways that we hold ourselves back from that than we are by actual hard and fast rules. Now, it may be a leap too far to say in that case, if we're trying to unlock curiosity, it's about more than simply changing the formal rules of an organization or implementing technologies. It's about creating a culture in which curiosity is diversified and shared. But of course, not just being curious about those things which you are permitted to be curious about. Curiosity is a way of breaking things, sometimes a way of breaking yourself, which is really the foundation of learning. If you don't have some disturbance, you can't truly learn. So there are perhaps two aspects of this. The outside edge of consequence is the way that rules are applied, but inside, we look out and we think, how close to that edge can we get? How curious can I be before I'm too curious? And so we create this sort of insulation gap between the action that we take and the potential space of operation. And I find this, it's an abstraction, it's a conceptual tool to understand, do we understand what this insulation gap is? And how can we minimize it? It's quite easy for people who hold a great deal of formal power to just push the edges of that back. It's hard for them to be reprimanded. But when we think about curiosity, there is a spotlight of consequence. And an important question is, who is directing that spotlight? Is it shone down through an organization, or can it also be shone up again? Are we equally accountable to each other? So when we think about curiosity, we do take a positive slant. You know, how do we unlock and benefit from it? But we have to also consider, how are people silenced within this? Of course, we're silenced for many reasons. Has anybody been silenced? Yes, Rita.
I thought it's a yes/no question.
Oh, it was a yes/no question, but you were so enthusiastic that I thought you could shout out. How have you been silenced?
Sorry, I'm just writing a tweet. How curious shall I be before I'm too curious? At the start of my life, always way too curious for everyone's liking, or at least the majority.
Okay, so the notion that you could be too curious.
Yes, and it's horrible. It's limiting.
It's limiting to be too curious. Anybody else who's been silenced for curiosity? I'm not asking you. That's cheating. I'm looking for a sign of life. Yes, thank you.
I feel sometimes that I'm the crazy one in the room, right?
Yeah.
Don't be too curious, you're crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, we need to connect then. Okay.
You're my services, all right?
You're a crazy person.
Yeah, I am.
And so craziness is interesting because it's an example of the violence of stories. By calling somebody quirky, maybe not crazy, if I say, oh yeah, you're quirky, I put you in a box, I constrain you in some way. It diminishes people as well as empowering them. That's interesting. We're silenced in many different ways, consequence being one of them. But the control of spaces is another, especially technology spaces. Who controls the space controls the consequence in many ways. If we take it out to the broadest level, this is some work, sort of tangential really, but this is work with the US military that I've been doing for 7 or 8 years now on disruption and failure. So understanding how systems fail, including organizations. And although the research has taken a long time, what's come out of it is really remarkably simple, and I would probably say remarkably obvious. Organizations that fail often have a few traits in common. The first is that they're full of really brilliant people like you and me. And the second is that most of those brilliant people can absolutely tell that they're going to fail, but they fail to aggregate opinion around an alternative view. Organizations tend to persist in the things that they do because they've always done them. So things like pride, which is a core mechanism of failure, stop us from hearing alternative voices. So curiosity is not enough unless we can aggregate it into a view which could challenge our established pride. Even morality is interesting. The notion that most organizations believe that they are fair and honest and equal, but somehow they can tend to be fair or honest or equal to those people who conform within an established norm. So by being the crazy one or the over-curious one, you can still be excluded. Even inclusive cultures have their limits. If you cut an organization in half, you probably discover something like this. This is based on a large piece of research work with the National Health Service in the UK, so a large, culturally fragmented, complex organisation, looking at communities, the communities that people believe they are part of to be effective. How many communities do you think you're part of? Many. Many. Any advance on many?
9.
9. 20. Anybody else? Very quiet. Shout out a number. It's like bingo, reverse bingo. 40, 100, yeah. The estimates in the research range between 2 and infinity, which to an averagely talented mathematician like myself makes it very hard to get an average. But when you ruled out infinity, you get to an average of about 15. People believe that they are a member of about 15 different communities on a daily basis that help them be effective. And those communities form these primary cultural units within an organization. Consider them trust-bonded structures, typically small, local, spaces where you can exhibit your curiosity unhindered, but not connected to all the other pieces. The secondary culture of the organization is much bigger, but much more fragmented. Some stories are shared between it, but typically safe stories. So we can be unhindered within these primary cultural spaces, but there's limited interconnectivity between the broader piece. So we end up with this as one of our core challenges, to unlock the curiosity of the individual, to understand the social structures which curiosity sits within, to understand how voices are silenced, but then to consider how we can interconnect those different pieces. Sometimes we talk about globally local, which is an easy thing to say, to be globally local. There's a reason why local exists, because it's safe. So if we wish to be globally local, it will require more than just technology. People say in the landscape of trust work, they said they trust technology given to them by the organization about 30% less than they trust social technology. In research with the National Health Service, when I talk about the technologies that people use to be effective, effectiveness is a good proxy for learning. They identify 17 different technologies used on a daily basis, 16 of which are explicitly forbidden from using on a daily basis. So why do they use those technologies? Yeah, they're better, they work. There is some nuance within that. They can control the permanence and ownership of a conversation. Ownership of a conversation is deemed to be extremely important within that. So again, you see, individual curiosity may cause us to engage, but it won't cause that curiosity to be amplified at scale. Reward is also something interesting, and it takes us into considering what are the social currencies of an organization. So as your culture moves away from utility towards invested effort and energy, if you want people to invest their brilliance, what will they want in return for that? What do you want in return for that?
Compensation, salary, purpose.
Salary, purpose. Anything else? Happiness. Interesting. Recognition, yeah, recognition is quite an important one. Often linked to opportunity. So it's not recognition in isolation, it's linked to opportunity. 54% of people say they want freedom in some way. If they're trusted enough, and if they trust the organization enough to invest, then they want that to be recompensed with freedom. To experiment, to explore, to help others is one of the key things they say. Only 7% of people want more money. So if you pull it together, in my own work I talk about socially dynamic organizations, organizations that have the best of that formal codified strength, but are able to be, you'll see it right in the middle, constantly curious, to know how to solve problems, but to have this capability, a diversified strength, to solve beyond system, process, and hierarchy. Resilience won't come in a new set of rules or a new codified strength. It will come through a fluidity. Guided, not governed. You know, especially in compliance-led organizations, regulated organizations, we focus on governance. But curiosity can't be governed. Even musicians, so I've interviewed 40 musicians in depth about creative process. They identify that something like 90% of the creative process is formulaic. There needs to be some kind of structure behind it, but the magic often sits in the way we move beyond that. Resilient through humility. Your hierarchy won't make the organization humble. It may unlock something, but to aggregate that and carry it to scale requires broad cultural transformation.
So, Julian, thank you so much. And when we started working on our Curiosity chapter, we hadn't met yet. I just love your thinking, and I think so many of the pieces that we're trying to bring to life and what we'll be doing again this year is really framed so well by what you've presented and what you've talked about. It really puts me in the mindset of wanting to create new experiences for people. But before we do that, we wanted to get some feedback from the group. So if we can just...
Okay, so we want to hear from you now, but we want you to talk to each other first before you talk to us. So what we want to know is, what has this provoked for you personally so far? What has it made you think about in terms of curiosity? And what might you want to do differently in terms of curiosity? I've actually got loads of curious questions to ask, but I don't want to take everybody else's questions. So just talk on your tables for a few minutes about what's resonated with you so far, and maybe what's missing, or what would you like differently? What maybe, is there something else that should be accentuated in terms of what's been shared so far with Nina and Julian? So about 5 minutes of chatting, and then we'll hear back from you. Okay, be interesting to hear back some of those quick conversations before we introduce the exercise to you. So let's just hear back from your tables. What sort of things you've been talking about that have resonated with you, or you feel are missing, or you just know something about curiosity and you feel desperately bursting to share it. So somebody, have you got a mic, Tina? Okay, Tina and I will run around with a mic, and Julian and Nina will facilitate the answers. Who's got something to comment? We've got one here.
I'm usually a very shy person, but we had a very, very interesting set of dynamics at the table here. We had some gentlemen here from Volvo, and they have an engineering culture, and they feel that engineers come sort of pre-wired to be curious, so that's kind of an interesting point of view. We had a science company. It's is that how to describe it? Abbott Labs, I know them as. And the interesting dynamic there is an acquisition. So there are two different cultures coming together, and some friction around how the new people arriving into that sort of broader culture can operate. And then we talked about a culture that's very, very resistant, very traditional, and there's been sort of top-down clearance to go do things differently, but people are sort of really digging in their heels. So some different examples of
Those sound like all
dynamics.
secondary cultures that exist in Novartis.
Yep.
We're trying to tackle
Sure.
all those.
All of them.
All of them. And so, great. And what are your thoughts about, is it about breaking up the communities to talk to each other? And
Yeah, I think it's worth remembering, scientific discipline is just structured curiosity, so it's a methodology based around curiosity. Culture is interesting. There are a number of different dominant views around it. My perspective is that culture is entirely created in the moment through the actions of every individual. So when we look at acquisition and merger, we see the actions of individuals resorting to tribal and oppositional spaces, which is very understandable. The key thing for me is that you cannot change culture through doctrine. However, you may create the frame in which it is changed. You may see, for example, just in the last couple of weeks, the Advertising Standards Authority in the UK has switched its legal position to rule against adverts which perpetuate messages of perpetuate gender stereotypes. So can you change the culture of the UK to be less structurally biased through rules? Probably not, but you can state intent and create a framework and opportunity for challenge. So I guess it's a combination of those things.
Yeah, hi. Ours was a bit depressing, actually. So, but I mean, to be curious, one of the things you need is headspace to do that, and time, and a separation from all of the other million things that take your attention at work. And I think most people, that headspace is a very scarce commodity for them. And then the other thought that we had was around if you're giving people license to be curious, you also need to be prepared that they may not be curious about the stuff that you want them to be curious about. And it should be okay for them to be curious about other unrelated things as well.
Just sort of a couple of points. So to your first point, yes, it is depressing, and yes, you should be annoyed about it. So if you look at the gender pay gap in the UK at the moment, you should be annoyed about it, and then you should promptly do something about it, which is true for every organisation in this room. If you do not have double-blinded mechanisms of measuring gender inequality, then you're perpetuating the dominant narrative of the moment. To your second point, you know, how you can free up time. It's interesting in my own work, and I've only looked in depth at this in one organisation. Time is typically a proxy for something else. So time may be a factor, but if you give people time, they don't typically become more effective at being curious and learning. There's actually a specific competency and skill set behind it. So almost every time people talk about time, I think you need to explore what else sits behind that.
We're really tackling that this year. So going big on learning for us means allocating 5% of time to learn throughout our organization. But that's a kitchen conversation. That's what we talk about as an aspiration. That's what we strive to achieve. We don't tell that to our people. We talk to them about how, what opportunities they have to learn, to integrate learning into their work, and more importantly to the headspace topic about recognizing that they're learning all the time. Because I think we're so focused on pushing content and pushing programs that we don't always take the time to step back and as individuals reflect on what we learn throughout our day. So a big part of our campaign this year will be around practicing learning every day, the same way that you practice gratitude and reflecting on what you've done throughout the course of your day so that your frame of reference shifts from thinking that learning is formal, something we all know people struggle with, to recognizing that it's happening in every moment.
So I think we have time for one more question. So somebody at the back by Tina.
Did we have someone on this table? Done it already, okay.
Before we get you curiously answering the questions on the table. Somebody else got a comment? Yes?
In our table, I think one of the themes that came up was the fear, especially in high-performance organizations or organizations where there's lots of regulations. There's just that fear, and that fear keeps us from being curious, and maybe it's just our perception as well.
I think that really hits upon the edge, right?
Yeah.
And getting people closer to it.
Absolutely. I mean, there are some very obvious lessons that we should learn in regulated organizations, which we consistently fail to learn. The first is that regulation isn't a set of rules to live by. It's a space of operation, and the competitive edge is often very close to the edge of regulation. But the other key lesson is that compliance cultures don't give you compliant behaviors. Behavior is almost entirely a cultural phenomena. So, compliance training and regulation can create the space for a highly effective operation. But in almost every case where you see non-compliant behavior, it is permitted and condoned and sanctioned by the local culture around it. So, to tackle the question, it's not about directly tackling compliance, it's about considering the culture in which transgressive behaviors would just be unthinkable, perhaps.
So shall we get on to the exercise,
Yes.
Nina?
I think we've done such a great job of getting in the mindset of what we've already tested a little bit, and I'll talk you through some examples from our plan from 2019, the Novartis plan, and you're welcome to try these things in your organization, or maybe you've already done something similar, or maybe you have ideas about how to build on them. So I'd love to hear those. And then at the end, I'd like us to work in groups again. We put these posters on the table, and to actually plan an intervention where the theme is that learning happens anywhere and everywhere, and where people who participate in that intervention really appreciate the fact that somebody or something encourages them, that learning goes beyond the classroom or the conference room, and that intervention isn't going to be just formal. I want us to look at an intervention that works from many different points of view, both digital and physical. And it can be anything. It doesn't have to be a classroom intervention. So think about some of the things that you have seen used to drive people, for example, from a marketing perspective on a billboard, something that really impacts their behavior. So get creative. But first, let me share with you some of the interventions that we planned during the last year and the way that we think about creating learning experiences. So In our organization, we try to create a frame where when we think about a learning experience, there's of course the technology component, then there's the partnering component, and that is what is the deployment network. I talked to you about the volunteer network, and that is the network who helped us partner and drive the change in the organization. But this year, when we're talking about planning this experience again, it's going even broader. I also have a network of people who work on mindfulness in each site, so we're gonna pull them in. So create that tribe or combine tribes so that you have good partners in driving the change. Then there is what we're calling faculty, but it's really the people who are subject matter experts or champions or strong voices in whatever that learning experience might be. Then there's the content of it. So what is that? And of course, how do you operate it? For example, operating 133 global webinars, which was one of the experiences, that was a huge financial investment for us, and headcount investment. It was a lot of work. And so how do you set up and scale up your organization to do something like that in an agile and quick way? For us, it was leveraging our LMS, Cornerstone, and a team of moderators behind it. So in your packet, there's an example plan of how we planned the 13 weeks. Just to get an idea of what was there, we tried to build up the momentum as we came up to this learning month. So in the beginning, it was about communications, like launching the team booster and having leaders use it in their teams and then post about it on Yammer with the hashtag I am curious. We brought stories of curiosity up in the organization, like our internal startup fund called Genesis Labs, which gives people 18 months to work on their ideas. Excuse me. And then we also got deep into the planning and started to actually do it week by week. You guys will have all of these slides if you want to use this frame in your own work in the future. But we really thought about how do we engage people virtually, how do we engage them in person, and what do they feel? Then for the project team, so for that partner network, we're in a really matrixed organization. We took a global view and also a country and divisional view. There were different tribes and different networks who needed to bring this to life. So it's important that everybody knows what their role is, what they should do, what steps they need to take. You're not creating a linear communications plan, you're creating an ecosystem. So this is just an example of how we thought about the kickoff. You guys saw the video. It's about getting people energized and engaged. Another such intervention was the launch of playlists. So we went through the organization, found leaders and influencers who I already told you brought together what they were doing around their own personal learning, and we positioned it in terms of school is out for summer. And it really helped people start feeling like my organization is learning all the time. I can also bring this learning that's not necessarily what my organization wants me to be learning into our learning culture and share, because it's really about living that day to day. Then we launched a portal based on Humans of New York, Humans of Novartis, where we told stories of great learning achievements, great curiosity achievements. We had the president of pharma in Central Europe, who was a very busy man, complete a 400-hour course on data science from Microsoft within 3 months. And it completely changed the way that he thought about learning. Nobody asked him to do it. He posted on Yammer that he had just completed it as part of sharing what we were learning throughout the Curiosity chapter. And we just said, that's remarkable. How do you manage to find that time to learn? And so stories like that were brought to the surface and shared as part of that activation. So, and then finally, back to the reward, we really spent a lot of time recognizing curiosity around us, and we gave out insights and reward points and badges for curiosity through Cornerstone and also through some of the other recognition systems that we have. So some ideas there. And now what I would like you to do is in your groups to take out the poster. There.
Presentation's amazing. I'd just like to know where if you have heard the participant, the learner. Sorry, if you have learned as part of the process, the participant, the learner, the team, to make sure that you understand their need also.
That we understand their need.
Yeah, or their view on this. If you've heard them in the beginning.
You mean from a topical perspective or a desire to learn?
In a design thinking approach, like if you put your learner in the center or whatever, if you have any specific activities to understand their view on curiosity.
Yeah, we did quite a lot of design thinking to understand the learner experience over the past 2 years. So we brought together, we talked about all these different groups that exist in Novartis. So we brought together user groups with many different profiles and really went deep into asking them and understanding from them how they learn and what fits them. And that's how, in 20 minutes we can't get deep into it, but that's a lot of what this frame came from, is the need to create the physical space for learning, the digital space for learning, because you have so many preferences. Some people like to learn individually, some like to learn in communities. So the mindset around the intervention is around creating that ecosystem.
I have a quick question. I don't want to interrupt the flow, but I'm really curious about, how could a drug company, a science company, not operate from a position of curiosity? Why did you feel that? I've never worked in one, so I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great.
Why did you feel you needed to sort of push on this?
I think that the concept that Julian talked about, about individual versus community curiosity, is really the frame and the barrier for us. You have a lot of people who are individually curious within their team, or as individuals within their work, but there were a lot of barriers, some from a perspective of psychological safety, some technical, some cultural, in the way that the company operated, that a lot of it, the work we did wasn't about making people more curious, it was about unleashing it. So removing barriers that existed.
And then what changed? What precipitated this effort?
Can I suggest, so that people do get the opportunity to participate in this exercise? Nina will still be here, won't you?
I will still be here.
So can we give people the chance to participate in the exercise, and then we can have some more questions? Is that okay?
Yes, definitely. So I would love for you in groups, taking all the great concepts that Julian brought in, getting some inspiration from what we already tried, to brainstorm together and plan some interventions that would help learners feel that they can learn anywhere and everywhere at any time. So I'll leave you to it.
So you may have to move to find a table that's got a sheet. Between you all, you've definitely all got the little booklets which have instructions in them. Yep. Yeah. And I guess you're going to have to come up with a concept very quickly. Okay, we know tea time's coming up. So we'd like to hear at least one amazing idea that one table at least has had so far. Nobody wants to go for tea. They all want to carry on talking about curiosity. Has anybody got one great idea they want to share with everybody else? Somebody over there? No?
Over here.
Yes, over here. Tina's going to scurry over. I know Nina's been listening in, and there have been a number of good ideas she's heard.
So we were talking about onboarding and how typically experience can be either that there's no onboarding or that you're not encouraged to bring forth your previous experience, that people are only focusing on what you're going to do now, what you did before, and it shuts down curiosity because you feel you can't question or compare or make comparisons. And so I think if people coming on board, you really openly encourage that curiosity and that sharing, it would promote culture much faster.
Yeah, I love that. And then it comes kind of from the strengths I bring to the organization perspective and And you can have an open discussion about how you fit into the culture also, right?
It's really interesting on that at the moment. We've got some active research looking at membership, so how people become a member of your organisation. And they describe very clearly a whole taxonomy of cultural alignment. So the first one is hours, minutes into hours into days, which is learning to conform. So they work out whether people swear, whether people make each other cups of tea, and they conform into that. And that tends to be described as the dominant form of membership. Right through to level of cultural alignment, which is described as geopolitical awareness, which people say might take 3 to 5 years, is the estimate they put on it, which is your ability to marshal movement at scale within the organisation. So in many ways, you can view induction and onboarding as a process of enforced conformity. And so perhaps our challenge is to create opportunities to move beyond the local very fast.
You say it so much more elegantly than any of us could, Julian. And there was a team in the back sitting down who had some great ideas about finding time to learn.
I'm being shy about it now.
So we were talking about, I sound so Yorkshire, horrible. We were talking about how we could use Teams, and there's a tool downstairs called Magpie by Filtered, I believe. And they bring your learning from the LMS into Teams. So it takes away that culture of you've got to go to the LMS to do X, Y, Z thing. It sort of brings it to you just when you need it. And I know it's something we've talked about a lot at YBS, how we sort of overcome the barriers to going on the LMS, really.
So moving from a pull to a push approach.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Any other really hot ideas? On the time to learn, one thing that we were talking about with the team back there, though, about not having enough time to learn was one thing we're trying now is in Office 365, there's the My Analytics. So we're just giving people a perspective on how much time they spend in certain tasks, how many people they're talking to. Last week, I had I'm not bragging, I'm complaining. I had almost no downtime and I talked to 250 people, and it helped me think, what am I doing? I need to be creating headspace, and so it was a nice tool to give me that consciousness to that.
So I have one final question. If you think you're a curious person already, I'd like you to stand up. So if you think you're curious, stand up. Ooh, good. If you think you'd like to be more, I think that's almost everybody. Is there anybody saying, if you think you'd like to be more curious and you're not already standing up, stand up. I think that's pretty much everybody. Okay, fantastic. I'd like to thank Nina and Julian very much for leading us through that session on curiosity, and can you give them a round of applause?